bell rang, marking the end of another long school day at Millbrook High. As students rushed out of their classrooms, eager to head home, a small group of 5 teenagers made their way to room 203. This was where the Astral Projection Club met every Wednesday afternoon. Sarah, a shy girl with glasses and long brown hair, was the first to arrive. She nervously arranged the cushions in a circle on the floor, just as Mr. Peterson had shown them last week. Sarah had joined the club hoping to find a way to calm her anxious mind. But so far, the meditation sessions hadn't helped much. Next came the twins, Alex and Jamie, arguing as usual. They were complete opposites. Alex believed in everything supernatural, while Jamie was a hardcore skeptic. Their bickering stopped as they entered the room, noticing Sarah's annoyed look. "Sorry," Alex mumbled, helping to set up the remaining cushions. Zach sauntered in next, his football jacket slung over one shoulder. He'd only joined the club because his coach suggested meditation might improve his game focus. He still felt a bit out of place among the weirdos, as he secretly thought of them. Last to arrive was Mia, the popular girl everyone was surprised to see at the first meeting. She'd been acting strange lately, quieter than usual, and rumors were flying about why she'd suddenly joined such an odd club. Mr. Peterson, their young and enthusiastic English teacher, clapped his hands to get everyone's attention. "All right, let's begin," he said with a warm smile. "Remember, astral projection is just a fancy term for deep meditation. We're here to relax, focus our minds, and maybe learn something about ourselves in the process." As they settled onto their cushions and closed their eyes, none of them could have imagined the incredible journey they were about to embark on, one that would change their lives forever. The room fell silent as the students focused on their breathing, following Mr. Peterson's calm instructions. Minutes ticked by, and most of the group struggled to stay still. Zach kept peeking at the others, feeling silly. Mia seemed lost in her own world, her face unusually peaceful. Suddenly, Sarah gasped. Her eyes flew open, wide with surprise. I felt something weird," she whispered. Mr. Peterson nodded encouragingly. "That's normal, Sarah. Can you describe what you felt?" Sarah hesitated, then spoke slowly. "It was like I was floating, just for a second, and I saw a bright light." Alex's eyes lit up with excitement, while Jamie rolled her eyes. "Probably just fell asleep for a moment," Jamie muttered. As they discussed Sarah's experience, none of them noticed the strange shimmer in the air near Mia. For a split second, it looked like there were 2 of her, one sitting peacefully on the cushion, and another standing beside her, looking around in confusion. But the standing Mia vanished in the blink of an eye. The club meeting ended with mixed feelings. Sarah was shaken but intrigued by her experience. Alex couldn't stop talking about the possibilities, while Jamie kept pointing out logical explanations. Zach left quickly, feeling uncomfortable with all the talk about weird stuff. Mia lingered behind, waiting until the others had gone. "Mr. Peterson," she said quietly, "I need to talk to you about something strange that's been happening to me." Mr. Peterson's eyebrows rose with interest. "Of course, Mia. What's on your mind?" But before Mia could answer, the principal stuck her head into the room. "Pete, can I borrow you for a minute? It's urgent." Mr. Peterson looked apologetically at Mia. "I'm sorry. Can we talk next week?" Mia nodded, but as she walked home, she couldn't shake the feeling that something incredible and terrifying was happening to her. She glanced nervously over her shoulder, almost expecting to see another version of herself following behind. Little did any of them know, their simple after-school club was about to turn their lives upside down, blurring the lines between reality and the impossible. The week crawled by, each member of the Astral Projection Club lost in their own thoughts about what had happened. When Wednesday finally arrived, there was a buzz of nervous energy in room 203. Mr. Peterson started the session as usual, but this time, something felt different. As the students closed their eyes and began to breathe deeply, a strange warmth filled the room. Sarah felt it first, that floating sensation again, but stronger. She kept her eyes shut tight, heart racing. Zach, determined to prove this was all nonsense, opened one eye to peek. He nearly fell off his cushion. The room looked wavy, like he was viewing it through water. And Sarah, he blinked hard, sure he was seeing things. Sarah's body seemed to be glowing faintly. Across the circle, the twins were having very different experiences. Jamie felt nothing but frustration, unable to relax. But Alex was somewhere else entirely. In his mind, he soared high above the school, looking down at the tiny buildings below. It felt so real, he could almost feel the wind on his face. Mia sat perfectly still, her face a mask of concentration. Suddenly, her eyes snapped open, filled with a mix of wonder and fear. "I can see them," she whispered. "See who?" Mr. Peterson asked softly, not wanting to break the other's concentration. Mia's voice trembled. "Everyone. I can see other versions of us, like shadows or ghosts." As if her words had broken a spell, the strange feeling in the room vanished. The other students opened their eyes, looking around in confusion. "What just happened?" Sarah asked, her voice shaky. Before anyone could answer, the lights flickered. For a split second, the room was plunged into darkness. When the lights came back on, everyone gasped. Written on the blackboard in large messy letters were the words, "You're not alone." Mr. Peterson stood up quickly, his face pale. "I think that's enough for today," he said, his usual calm demeanor shaken. As the students gathered their things, still stunned by what had happened, none of them noticed the small shimmering portal that had opened in the corner of the room. It winked out of existence just as Zach, the last to leave, closed the door behind him. Outside, storm clouds were gathering, casting an eerie light over the school. The Astral Projection Club had just taken its first real step into the unknown, and there was no turning back now. The next day at school, the members of the Astral Projection Club couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. They exchanged nervous glances in the hallways, each wondering if the others had experienced the same strange things they had. At lunch, they gathered at a quiet table in the corner of the cafeteria. "We need to talk about yesterday," Sarah whispered, her eyes darting around to make sure no one was listening. Jamie scoffed, trying to maintain her skepticism. It was probably just a power surge or something, and that writing on the board, someone's playing a prank on us. "A prank?" Alex countered, his voice rising with excitement. "How do you explain what I saw?" "I was flying, Jamie. Actually flying." Zach, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. I saw something too." The room looked weird, and Sarah was glowing. Sarah's eyes widened. "You saw that?" "I thought I was imagining things." Mia sat silently, picking at her food. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. "It's been happening to me for weeks now. I see things, people who aren't there. Sometimes I think I'm in two places at once." The group fell silent, the weight of Mia's confession hanging in the air. Suddenly, a loud crack of thunder made them all jump. Outside, the storm that had been threatening since yesterday finally broke. Rain lashed against the windows as lightning illuminated the darkened sky. As if drawn by an unseen force, they all turned to look out the window at the same moment. A collective gasp escaped their lips. For a split second, illuminated by a flash of lightning, they saw themselves standing in the rain-soaked courtyard, staring back at them with expressions of fear and wonder. The vision vanished as quickly as it had appeared, leaving them stunned and confused. Did you all see that?" Zach stammered. Before anyone could answer, the PA system crackled to life. "Would the members of the Astral Projection Club please report to the principal's office immediately?" a stern voice announced. As they gathered their things, a sense of dread settled over the group. Something was happening, something beyond their understanding, and it was clear that their lives would never be the same. They made their way through the now empty halls, the storm raging outside. As they approached the principal's office, they saw Mr. Peterson waiting for them, his face grave. "I'm afraid we have a situation," he said quietly. "What we've been doing, it's opened something we might not be able to close." The door to the principal's office swung open on its own, revealing not the familiar room, but a swirling vortex of light and shadow. The Astral Projection Club stood on the threshold of a journey that would take them far beyond the walls of their high school, into realms they never knew existed. The swirling vortex pulled at them, a silent but irresistible force. Sarah reached out and grabbed Alex's hand, who in turn clutched Jamie's arm. Zach, his eyes wide with fear, held onto Mia's shoulder. Before Mr. Peterson could stop them, the 5 students were yanked forward into the shimmering portal. They fell through a kaleidoscope of colors and sensations, tumbling through space and time. When they finally landed, it was with a soft thud on a surface that felt like grass, but looked like shimmering silver. "Where are we?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling as she looked around. The landscape was alien. Trees with leaves that changed colors like mood rings, rocks that floated inches above the ground, and a sky that seemed to ripple like water. "I think," Mia said slowly, "we're in the astral plane." Jamie, usually so quick to dismiss the supernatural, was speechless. She reached out to touch a nearby floating rock, gasping as her hand passed right through it. "Guys," Zach said, his voice tight with panic, "look at us." They all looked down at themselves. Their bodies were translucent, glowing with a faint inner light. They could see right through each other. We're actually projecting, Alex whispered, a mix of awe and fear in his voice. Suddenly, a figure appeared before them, a woman with silver hair and eyes that seemed to contain entire galaxies. When she spoke, her voice echoed in their minds rather than their ears. "Welcome, young travelers," she said. "You have crossed the veil far sooner than expected." "Who are you?" Mia asked, somehow finding the courage to speak. The woman smiled. "I am a guide, and you five, you are awakened. Your meditation has opened doors that have been closed for centuries." "But we didn't mean to," Sarah protested. "We were just trying to relax, to meditate." The guide's expression grew serious. "Intent matters little in matters of the soul. You have awakened abilities that will change your lives forever. But be warned, where there is light, there is also shadow. And the shadows here, they hunt." As if summoned by her words, a dark mist began to creep towards them, tendrils of inky blackness reaching out hungrily. "You must learn to control your projection, to navigate the astral planes," the guide said urgently. "Your physical bodies are still in your world, vulnerable, if you cannot return to them." She didn't need to finish the sentence. The implications were clear and terrifying. "How do we get back?" Zach asked, his voice cracking. "Focus on your physical selves, on the room you left behind," the guide instructed. "But hurry, the shadow approaches, and it feeds on fear." The dark mist was closer now, and they could hear whispers emanating from it, tempting, terrifying whispers that spoke to their deepest fears and darkest desires. Holding hands once more, the five friends closed their eyes, desperately trying to picture the principal's office, to feel the solidity of their physical bodies. As the first tendrils of shadow brushed against their glowing forms, they felt a lurch, and suddenly they were falling again, hurtling back towards reality. They crashed back into their bodies with a jolt, gasping for air. They were back in the principal's office, sprawled on the floor. Mr. Peterson was kneeling beside them, his face ashen. "What happened?" he asked. "You all just collapsed, and I couldn't wake you." The five friends looked at each other, still shaken by their experience. They had returned, but something had changed. They could feel it, a new awareness, a connection to something vast and mysterious. And somewhere, in the back of their minds, they could still hear the guide's warning. Where there is light, there is also shadow. Their after-school club had just become something far more serious and dangerous than they could have ever imagined. The days following their astral adventure were a blur of confusion, fear, and excitement. The five friends tried to go about their normal lives, but nothing felt normal anymore. In class, Sarah found herself involuntarily slipping into a trance-like state. Her consciousness would start to drift, and she'd see flashes of the silver grass and mood-ring trees. It took all her concentration to stay present in the physical world. Alex couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he felt like he was about to project again. He started chugging energy drinks to stay awake, earning worried looks from his parents. Jamie, once the group's skeptic, now jumped at every shadow. She swore she could hear whispers sometimes, echoes of the dark mist that had nearly caught them in the astral plane. Zach's performance on the football field suffered. He kept zoning out during practice, seeing ghostly versions of his teammates overlaid with their physical bodies. Coach threatened to bench him if he didn't get his head in the game. But it was Mia who worried them the most. She seemed to be adapting to their new reality faster than any of them, slipping in and out of light trances with ease. Sometimes, in the middle of a conversation, her eyes would glaze over, and she'd mutter about things none of them could see. They gathered again in room 203. A week after their shared projection, Mr. Peterson looked haggard, like he hadn't slept in days. "I've been researching," he said, gesturing to a stack of old books on his desk. "What's happened to you? It's not unheard of, but it's rare and it's dangerous." "Can we stop it?" Zach asked hopefully. "Go back to normal?" Mr. Peterson shook his head. "I'm afraid not. Once awakened, these abilities don't just go away, but we can learn to control them." He handed each of them a small, smooth stone. "These are grounding stones. They should help you stay anchored in this reality." As soon as Mia touched her stone, she gasped. Her eyes rolled back, and she started speaking in a voice that wasn't her own. "The veil thins," she said, her words echoing strangely in the small room. "They are coming. The shadowkin hunger for the light of the newly awakened." Mia slumped forward, and Alex barely caught her before she hit the floor. When she came to, she had no memory of what she'd said. A heavy silence fell over the room. They all felt it, a shift in the air, like reality itself was stretching thin. "What do we do now?" Sarah asked, her voice small and frightened. Mr. Peterson took a deep breath. "We learn, we practice, and we prepare. Because if what Mia said is true, we might be the only ones who can stop whatever's coming." As if in response to his words, the lights in the room flickered. For a moment, they all saw it. The world around them seemed to peel away, revealing glimpses of that other alien landscape. The Astral Projection Club looked at each other, a mix of determination and fear on their faces. Their after-school hobby had become a battle for the safety of two worlds. And ready or not, they were the ones who had to fight it. Weeks passed, and Room 203 became more than just a meeting place. It was their training ground. The Astral Projection Club now gathered daily, driven by a mix of fear and determination. Mr. Peterson pushed them hard, teaching them techniques to control their projections. "Visualize a tether," he'd say, pacing around the room. "A golden cord, connecting your astral self to your physical body." They practiced projecting in short bursts, always keeping one person awake to watch over their bodies. It was exhausting work, but they were making progress. Sarah discovered she had a talent for astral navigation. She could guide the others through the shifting landscapes of the other plane, always finding a way back to their entry point. Alex learned to manipulate the astral environment, shaping the silver grass and floating rocks with his thoughts. It was like lucid dreaming, but with much higher stakes. Jamie, still struggling with her fear, found she could sense the Shadowkin before the others. Her paranoia became their early warning system. Zach's athletic training paid off in unexpected ways. He was the fastest in astral form, zipping through the otherworldly terrain with ease. And Mia was in a league of her own. She took to astral projection like she was born for it, slipping between realities as easily as changing clothes. But with her growing power came disturbing side effects. Sometimes, in the middle of a conversation, she'd respond to things no one had said, as if hearing voices from the other side. One afternoon, as they prepared for another training session, the air in room 203 suddenly grew cold. The lights flickered, and a deep, bone-chilling moan echoed through the room. "They're coming," Mia whispered, her eyes wide with fear. "The Shadowkin, they've found a way through." As if summoned by her words, dark tendrils began seeping through the walls, coalescing into shadowy humanoid shapes. Their eyes glowed with an eerie, hungry light. "Project now," Mr. Peterson shouted, already slumping in his chair as his consciousness left his body. The students didn't hesitate. In seconds, their physical bodies were seated in a circle, eyes closed, while their astral forms stood ready for battle. The Shadowkin attacked, their touch leaving icy trails on the students' astral bodies. But the Astral Projection Club was ready. Sarah directed their movements, keeping them organized. Alex reshaped the classroom in the astral plane, creating barriers the Shadowkin couldn't easily cross. Jamie's warnings allowed them to dodge the worst attacks, while Zach darted in and out, disrupting the Shadowkin's formations. Mia stood in the center, her astral form glowing brighter than the others. She raised her hands, and beams of pure light shot from her palms, driving the shadows back. The battle raged across both planes. In the physical world, the classroom shook, books fell from shelves, and an unearthly wind howled. In the astral plane, light and shadow clashed in a spectacular display. Finally, with a unified push of will, the five friends drove the last of the Shadowkin back through the weakening barrier between worlds. As the last shadow dissipated, they snapped back into their physical bodies, gasping for air. They looked at each other, exhausted but triumphant. They had faced their first real test and survived. But their victory was short-lived. Mr. Peterson's face was grim as he looked out the window. Outside, storm clouds were gathering, darker and more ominous than any they'd seen before. Lightning flashed, and in its brief illumination, they saw hundreds of shadowy figures moving among the clouds. "This was just the beginning," Mr. Peterson said quietly. "The real war is about to start." The Astral Projection Club stood together, watching the approaching storm. They were tired, scared, and in way over their heads. But they were also the only ones who could stand between two worlds and the darkness that threatened to consume them both. As another flash of lightning illuminated their determined faces, they knew that their greatest challenge was yet to come. The storm raged for days, trapping the students in the school. As the outside world descended into chaos, Millbrook High became their fortress and battleground. Parents called frantically, but cell signals were weak and inconsistent. The few adults left in the building huddled in the cafeteria, led by a shaken Principal Gonzalez. They couldn't see the shadows that slithered along the walls, but they felt the unnatural cold. heard the whispers that shouldn't exist. In room 203, the Astral Projection Club worked tirelessly. They took shifts, some projecting to fight off Shadowkin incursions, others sleeping fitfully on yoga mats Mr. Peterson had scrounged from the gym. "We can't keep this up forever," Zach said, his voice hoarse from exhaustion. He had just returned from an astral scouting mission, his projection tattered and dim. Sarah nodded, dark circles under her eyes. "The barrier between worlds is getting weaker. Every time we push them back, more come through." Alex pored over one of Mr. Peterson's old books, frantically searching for answers. There has to be a way to close the breach permanently. Jamie, who had been staring out the window at the swirling storm, suddenly stiffened. "Guys," she whispered, "something's different. Something big is coming." As if in response to her words, the lights flickered and died. In the darkness, they heard Mia gasp. When emergency lights sputtered to life, they saw her floating several inches off the ground, her eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. "The Shadowkin King approaches," Mia said, her voice echoing strangely. "He seeks to merge our world with the astral plane, to rule over both." Mr. Peterson's face went pale. "If that happens, reality as we know it will collapse. We have to stop him." "How?" Alex asked, fear evident in his voice. "We can barely hold off his minions." Mia slowly descended to the floor, the glow fading from her eyes. "There might be a way," she said softly, "but it's dangerous. We'd have to project deeper into the astral plane than we've ever gone before, to the very heart of the Shadowkin's power." "To do what?" Sarah asked. "To collapse the breach from their side," Mia replied. "But it would take all of us. And if we fail, if we can't find our way back..." She didn't need to finish. They all knew the stakes. Trapped in the astral plane, their physical bodies would eventually die. A heavy silence fell over the room. Then, slowly, Zach stood up. "I'm in," he said. "Better to go down fighting than wait for the end." One by one, the others nodded their agreement. Mr. Peterson looked at each of them, pride and fear warring on his face. "You've all grown so much," he said. "But this is beyond anything we've faced." "We know," Sarah said, her voice stronger than she felt. "But we're the only ones who can do this." As they prepared for what might be their final projection, the storm outside reached a fever pitch. Lightning split the sky, and in the brief flashes, they could see a massive, shadowy figure forming in the clouds. The Shadowkin King had arrived. With one last look at each other, the Astral Projection Club sat in their familiar circle. As they closed their eyes and let their consciousness drift, each of them carried the same thought. No matter what happened, they would face it together. Their physical bodies slumped as their astral forms rose, glowing with determination. Before them, a portal swirled into existence, darker and more ominous than any they'd seen before. Taking a deep breath they no longer needed, the five friends joined hands. Then, as one, they stepped into the unknown, ready to fight for two worlds that would never know of their sacrifice. Behind them, Mr. Peterson watched over their motionless bodies, a silent guardian for five heroes about to face their greatest challenge. The astral plane they entered was unlike anything they had experienced before. The familiar silver grass and mood ring trees were gone, replaced by a landscape of swirling shadows and pulsing vein-like structures that seemed to beat with malevolent energy. "Stay close," Sarah whispered, instinctively taking the lead. "I'm not sure I can find our way back if we get separated." They moved forward, their astral forms glowing like beacons in the oppressive darkness. Strange, ethereal cries echoed around them, and the shapes flitted at the edges of their vision. "Guys," Jamie said, her voice tight with fear. "We're being watched. I can feel them. Hundreds of them." Zach tried to lighten the mood. "Well, we did crash their party. Guess we're the entertainment." As they pressed on, the environment became increasingly hostile. Tendrils of darkness lashed out at them, trying to separate the group. Alex created shields of pure thought, barely holding back the onslaught. Suddenly Mia stopped. Her eyes were wide, staring at something the others couldn't see. "He's here," she whispered. The darkness before them coalesced, forming into a massive, towering figure. The Shadowkin King was a creature of pure shadow, with eyes that burned like dying stars, and a crown of twisted ethereal metal upon his head. When he spoke, his voice was like the void itself. "Foolish children," he rumbled. "You dare to enter my domain?" Sarah stepped forward, her voice shaking but determined. "We're here to stop you. You can't have our world." The Shadowkin King laughed, a sound that sent chills through their astral forms. "Your world. It was ours long before your kind ever drew breath. We are merely reclaiming what was taken from us." As he spoke, The shadows around them writhed and pulsed, forming into an army of Shadowkin. They were surrounded. Now, the king continued, you have a choice. Join us. Become beings of shadow and thought, free from the limitations of your physical forms, or perish, your essence scattered across the astral winds. The 5 friends looked at each other. In that moment, without words, they reaffirmed their commitment to each other and their mission. We choose neither, Mia said, her voice ringing with newfound power. She began to glow brighter, drawing strength from some unknown source. The others felt it too, a surge of energy flowing through their astral forms. Somehow, their connection to each other was amplifying their abilities. Now, Mia shouted. They sprang into action. Zack darted through the Shadowkin ranks, faster than ever before, sowing confusion. Jamie's heightened senses allowed her to predict the Shadow's movements, calling out warnings and openings. Alex shaped the very fabric of the astral plane, creating barriers and weapons of pure thought. Sarah kept them oriented, ensuring they didn't lose themselves in the chaos of battle. And at the center of it all was Mia. Radiant and powerful, she faced the Shadowkin King, matching his dark energy with beams of pure light. The battle raged across the twisted landscape. For every Shadowkin they dispelled, 2 more seemed to take its place. They were outnumbered, outgunned, fighting an enemy on its home turf. But they were no longer the inexperienced teenagers who had stumbled into astral projection by accident. They were warriors now, bound by friendship and forged in the fires of countless battles. As they fought, they began to sense something, a pulse, a heartbeat underlying the entire realm, the source of the Shadowkin's power, and the key to sealing the breach between worlds. There, Sarah shouted, pointing to a swirling vortex of darkness at the heart of the Shadow King's throne. They understood without words. That was their target. That was how they would end this. But as they pushed towards it, the Shadowkin King roared in fury. The very fabric of the astral plane shuddered under the force of his rage. You will not deny us our destiny, he bellowed, gathering his power for one final, devastating attack. The Astral Projection Club stood together, battered but unbroken, facing down a being of almost unimaginable power. The fate of 2 worlds hung in the balance. And in that moment, on the knife's edge between victory and annihilation, 5 friends prepared to risk everything for the chance to save everything they loved. Time seemed to slow as the Shadowkin King unleashed his attack. A wave of pure darkness surged towards them, threatening to obliterate their astral forms entirely. In that moment, Mia stepped forward, her hands outstretched. Light poured from her, forming a shield that barely held back the onslaught. I can't hold it for long, she gasped, the strain evident in her voice. Then we end this now, Sarah said. She grabbed Zack's hand. Get us to that vortex. Zack nodded, his face set with determination. In a blur of speed, he pulled Sarah through the chaos of battle, weaving between Shadowkin, straight towards the pulsing heart of their realm. Alex and Jamie formed a protective circle around Mia, who was still holding back the king's attack. Whatever you're going to do, Alex shouted to Sarah, do it fast. Sarah reached the vortex, feeling its pull even as she resisted it. This close, she could sense the wrongness of it, a tear in the fabric of reality itself. She knew instinctively what she had to do. But the cost. Zack, she said, turning to him, I need you to guide the others back. I have to stay to close the breach. What? No, Zack protested. We do this together or not at all. Sarah smiled sadly. There's no other way. Someone has to remain to seal it from this side. Before Zack could argue further, a familiar voice rang out. Not alone you won't. Mia was there, her astral form blazing like a star. I can amplify your power, she said. Together, we can close the breach and still have a chance to make it back. Across the battlefield, Alex and Jamie shared a look. Without a word, they joined hands and focused all their energy on holding back the Shadowkin, giving their friends the time they needed. Sarah nodded at Mia, tears in her eyes. Together then, they plunged their hands into the vortex. Pain unlike anything they'd ever felt coursed through them. But they held on. They poured every ounce of their will, their hope, their very essence into sealing the breach. The Shadowkin King roared in fury and disbelief as he felt his connection to the human world start to fade. No, centuries of planning. You cannot deny us. But it was already happening. The veil between worlds mended, the tear knitting itself closed with agonizing slowness. The Shadowkin began to fade, their forms becoming insubstantial as they lost their anchor to the physical plane. With a final desperate surge of will, Sarah and Mia completed their task. The vortex collapsed in on itself, taking the last of the Shadowkin with it. The astral plane shuddered, and then silence. Exhausted beyond measure, the 5 friends found themselves back in their bodies in room 203. They opened their eyes to see sunlight streaming through the windows. The storm had passed. Mr. Peterson was there, tears streaming down his face. "You did it," he said softly. "I don't know how, but you did it." In the days that followed, the world tried to make sense of what had happened. The strange storms, the unexplained phenomena, all were chalked up to freak weather patterns and mass hysteria. Only a handful of people knew the truth. For the members of the Astral Projection Club, life would never be the same. They had seen wonders and terrors beyond imagination, had fought for the fate of 2 worlds. They carried scars, visible and invisible, but also a bond that could never be broken. As they gathered in room 203 for what they decided would be their final official meeting, there was a sense of both ending and beginning. "So," Zach said, breaking the contemplative silence, "what do we do now? Go back to being regular high school students?" Jamie snorted, "As if we could ever be regular again." "We keep watch," Sarah said quietly. "The breach is sealed, but who knows what other dangers are out there." Alex nodded. "We've been given these abilities for a reason. I think our journey is just beginning." Mia, who had been unusually quiet, finally spoke. "Whatever comes next, we face it together. After all," she said with a small smile, "that's what the Astral Projection Club is all about, right?" They shared a laugh, the tension of the past weeks finally breaking. As they left the room, stepping out into the sunlight, they knew that while one chapter of their lives had closed, an even greater adventure was just beginning. Mr. Peterson watched them go, a mix of pride and concern on his face. He turned to erase the chalkboard, pausing as he saw what was written there in familiar, messy handwriting. "Thank you for showing us the way. We'll take it from here." He smiled, shook his head, and began to erase. The Astral Projection Club had outgrown its humble beginnings, but its legacy would live on in the 5 extraordinary young people who had learned to bridge 2 worlds. As the last bell of the day rang, life at Millbrook High returned to normal. But for 5 friends, nothing would ever be truly normal again. And somehow, that was okay. The end. Or perhaps, just the beginning.